Welcome, folks. Thank you all for coming. We're super glad to be here at ESIP with you. Title of our session, focus of our session today, what roles should civil society play in climate and environmental data stewardship? I want to quickly introduce our team. My name's Gretchen Gerke. I'm a co-founder of the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative.
Hi, I'm Katie Hoberling. I'm the Director of Policy Initiatives at Open Environmental Data Project, and I'm just going to turn the video on real quick.
Hi, I'm Greg Maurer. I am a data manager in the LTR network and work with the Environmental Data Initiative repository, and I'm sort of a recent volunteer with PEDP now.
And we have two team members on virtually also. Dan and Christopher, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'm Dan Pasut. I am with Esri. I work within our Living Atlas on open data and web services, and I'm really excited to be supporting PEDP.
And I'm Christopher Kane. I'm here with the Environmental Data Governance Initiative as a working group coordinator. Yeah, and I'm excited to learn from you all and hear what you what role you think civil society can play in environmental data.
And as you may have picked up, we are all part of this coalition called the Public Environmental Data Partners, and I'll introduce more about that later. We're happy to be here today. So why are we here, both physically in this room and then also virtually? Well, as everyone in this room is aware, American climate and environmental data is under threat. And with the shrinking of the federal government and the both in staff and also in the roles, priorities and the roles that the federal government is currently playing, civil society will need to step up to take over some of the components of the federal data enterprise that currently federal partners lead and conduct. And so the purpose of our session today is to ask some questions. How do I advance this slide? Oh, the mouse.
So click off of the meeting controls. Yeah, there you go. I do like that, and then
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, folks. So the goal of today is to first identify which aspects of the federal data enterprise can be taken on by civil society and which cannot. For those that can, how? We want to dive in and explore these opportunities and really get a little bit granular here, because we really do need to have a plan for stepping up. For those that civil society cannot take on, we need to double down with our advocacy. We need to identify those and double down, supporting our federal partners to be able to do that, advocating for the continuation of those responsibilities by our federal partners. And so those are kind of our three main goals of today. How we'll do it is first we'll have this welcome and introductions. I will have a really short presentation kind of about the threats to federal data and kind of current actions. Then we'll have we'll list a series of hypotheses of places where civil society can or cannot step up and lead on those elements of the federal data enterprise. And we'll have a group discussion, kind of checking some of those assumptions, and then break into small breakout groups to get kind of more granular for hypotheses that we think are worthwhile, kind of digging into more, not just the if, but the how. And we'll regroup and then report out. Before we start, I want to just lay a couple of ground rules, because this can feel sensitive, kind of a sensitive subject. First, here we will use Chatham House rules. So absolutely feel free to talk about today's session and the ideas shared here, but don't associate someone's name and position with an idea that they shared. Just to kind of help people feel free communicating what they want to communicate without facing potential repercussions. For our virtual attendees, we invite you to have your camera on to create more of an intimate space for people who feel more comfortable sharing with each other. It's okay if you don't, but we definitely invite camera on. And just in general, trying to be constructive, not nagging someone's idea without offering something in its place. And finally, kind of respecting the rule of N. So there are N number of people in the room, aim to speak for about 1/n of the time. Okay, so our data system is under threat. We know this, we've seen data come down, we've seen tools come down, we've seen the shrinking federal workforce. What are the specific challenges that we're facing? First off, budget and staffing cuts. It's unlikely that this budget will actually go through, but the administration proposed a 56% cut to EPA's budget, a 26% cut to NASA's budget, and a 17% cut to NOAA's budget. These are massive budget cuts that have been proposed. We've already seen massive staffing reductions, as we know. It's actually even hard to get kind of specific data on how many staff have been let go because it's been so chaotic. But we know that there's already been a 25% decrease in the number of EPA employees on payroll. These staffing cuts are not, the budget and staffing cuts are not kind of uniform. They're targeted at specific areas, as we know. So, we've seen every single environmental justice related office closed across the entirety of the federal government. We have just recently seen the EPA's Office of Research and Development is going to be shuttered, completely shuttered. We are anticipating that the NOAA's research arm is going to be, if not shuttered, really cut at the knees. We've seen the removal of climate.gov. The entirety of the staff dedicated to climate.gov have been terminated. So all of these are specific threats to climate and environmental data and science. We're also seeing extramural research cuts. The administration's proposed budget included a 40% cut to NIH and a more than a 50% cut to NSF. We're seeing regulatory rollbacks, including regulations that generate environmental data. The greenhouse gas reporting program is on the chopping block. It's proposed to be repealed. The waste emissions charge rule for methane emissions is proposed to be repealed. A lot of the regulations that generate some of our climate relevant data are being repealed. And beyond that, we've seen a series of actions that are suppressing information and data. We have seen the removal of all 9 federal equity screening tools. That's FEMA's Future Risk Index. That's the Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool, EPA's EJ Screen. We've seen all 9 of those federal tools completely removed. We've also observed, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Global Change Research Program, their entire website was removed that housed the national climate assessments. So that plus a series of other informational resources to support policy decisions, to support personal decisions, to support regulatory actions. Those were all removed with that. We all know that NOAA has a statutory authority and mandate to provide climate information to the public, but there's some interesting workarounds happening. As I mentioned, climate.gov staff have been terminated, but also on climate.gov's, they have a teaching climate webpage. That webpage still stands. All 726 resources on it have been deleted. So there's significant information suppression happening. With these cuts, we know that civil society has to step up to support the future of our climate and environmental data and the information gleaned from that data. And we can do this. And so first I want to talk about, how is civil society already supporting the federal enterprise? The civil servants really do provide a lot of this data already. And here I want to note, when I say civil society, at the current moment, I just big tent, any non-governmental actors. So nonprofits, academics, and also private industry. So right now, when we say civil society, we mean non-governmental actors. So examples of, in the data lifecycle, entities are already supporting each of these different elements of the data lifecycle. There are, research institutions like the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is funded by NASA, but operated by Caltech. There's the National Ecological Observation Network, funded by NSF, but operated by Battelle. So, these are research institutions that are planning, collecting, assuring, processing, not sure about preserving, sharing, integrating, analyzing, reporting. They're doing all of these elements already themselves, but they're fully federally funded. Then we also see academic and nonprofit institutions that have a mix of federal and philanthropic funding that also provide all of these services, like the Woods Hole Oceanographic. I always mix up the word. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. That's a mix of federal and philanthropic funding. They have public-private partnerships within it, but it is a nonprofit entity. There's a series of others. Even the New England Aquarium. It's a fairly small nonprofit as these things go, but it's taken real leadership on right whale data. So we're seeing, and of course I'd be remiss to say, we also have private companies that are already serve as the backbone for a lot of the federal data infrastructure, as we've been learning a lot about today. We have Esri, we have AWS. So these are private companies that are already serving a significant role in the federal data enterprise. So we want to explore what of this can be done, not only just by civil society actors, as we're seeing is already happening, but also on a short timeline, stepping up kind of immediately and without federal funding, which is the real kicker. So we have a series of Oh, great. Okay, thanks. So here are a set of hypotheses. All of these, the point is just to lay out a hypothesis, and then you guys can push back on it. So these are not like, we're not really saying like this is truth, but the point is to generate some discussion. Our first hypothesis is that civil society cannot meaningfully take over large-scale and complex data collection without significant investments in funding, infrastructure, and time, from that's currently being provided by the federal government, and we don't know where that next source of funding is. We are hypothesizing that civil society can handle large data processing to release for model building and broad data use, including both academic and private partners. That civil society can integrate data collected by state and local entities in order to combine and publish for national scale data. We hypothesize that civil society can integrate disparate data types and analyze them in useful ways. I'm thinking, reproducing things like CGIS, where you're bringing together demographic data, environmental data, climate data, disaster data. We hypothesize that civil society can preserve federal data at scale and reproduce public access pathways to data. I failed to mention one thing on the data lifecycle slide that I'm realizing. I was going to introduce our coalition, because one, I want to say that in this moment, civil society is also stepping up to preserve federal data. Specifically right now, it's not something that civil society has typically done, but we are stepping up to preserve federal data right now, and that's our coalition that we started back in November. Basically was to be able to kind of shore up, provide backups of federal data in non-federal places. And so that's the purpose of our coalition. But we're sort of working our way through about 300 environmental data sets that were identified by diverse stakeholders. And now are asking the question of, we know that archiving data is not enough. What's next? But we do hypothesize that civil society can and will continue to preserve federal data and can do this at scale, not just at the couple hundred data set level, but we can do it at scale as well. We hypothesize that civil society can analyze data to glean meaningful information for scientific understanding, policy development, and public action, such as producing the national climate assessments. That civil society can monitor changes in public policy and funding priorities that put value data sets at risk and anticipate those risks. We hypothesize that civil society can coordinate efforts to preserve and maintain the discoverability of federally supported data sets that are at risk. That we can generate awareness of risks to federally supported data sets and advocate for action and resources that will maintain or restore them. And I also want to open up the floor for any other hypotheses that are kind of top of mind for you all, both can and can't hypotheses. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for this session. Can civil society share the value of these data sets and amplify like stories, and is that part of that here? Communication and storytelling and amplifying value?
Yeah, I can write that down. I see.
And we're going to get into breakout groups to get into more detail with these, but.
Hi, thanks, Gretchen. How are we defining civil society? That's a pretty broad term, and it's going to have different solutions, and different people have different abilities to engage and help. So in this context, how are you defining that?
Yeah, exactly. In this kind of right now, super broad tent, anyone who's not government. But in the breakout rooms, when we get into more granular detail, that's, I think, where those differences will have to, there are certain things that academic institutions can do that, a 10-year-old nonprofit cannot. And so that's, I think, where, when it gets more into the operationalizing of these, where we'll explore those differences.
I see in the chat, someone shared, can civil society provide the listed cans in a sustained manner?
Great question.
Got one bit back here.
This is poorly formed, but the actual creative ideation of new ways to actually use the data for actionable, positive results, I think can come from civil society more than it would have been coming from government. So kind of that creative thinking about, putting the data to use, which usually is going to involve integration. So a lot of these pieces, but that kind of creativity would sit on top of a lot of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm. I'm a sixth grade teacher, and I think the civil society is going to be my students, because I'm here in order to take data from you guys and make meaningful to them the data, so they are going to be in the future the society that can decide that this is important.
There's another thing that I think underlies a lot of this that's worth talking about, and that is the liability protection that the government provides for the use of government data. And I'm not even sure that big business is willing to assume all of that liability risk. If you submit your data to an ocean observing system, the government assumes risk for use or abuse of that data or fiability of that data. If you submit your data to the National Bathymetric Mapping Program, you're not liable if a ship goes aground because of how you surveyed it. So the risk of sharing data, the government really has this magic trick where they can waive all liability and assume it. And I think for certain data sets and data sources, losing that jeopardizes the possibility for any of this to happen.
Do this too in case you want to run around. Oh, that's okay. Okay, so basically what we want to do. Can I pull up my plan? We know that there's a lot of nuance to whether or not these hypotheses are likely true or not. They might be true for some types of data or some data sets at different parts of that data lifecycle. They might not be true for others. And so what we wanted to do with you all, so in the next five or so minutes, we're going to break out into groups to discuss some of these hypotheses in more detail, get into the kind of who and how, the possible negative impacts of civil society taking some of these things on, what might be lost in that process, and what we might try to do to support more sustainable stewardship in the long term, potentially turning things back over to government at some point. But we wanted to get these kind of in front of you, get brains going in terms of what could happen and what could not. And we also wanted to do a little bit of a poll, although were you able to write down some of the new ones?
I wrote them down, but I cannot edit the poll.
Yeah, okay.
Most of them are in the chat, if that's helpful.
I think what we could do then, I'm curious if because we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, I'm curious if anyone has any questions. I know we already got a question about what we mean by civil society, other things that we might be able to answer while I edit the poll a little bit. We could do a little bit of Q&A for that. Yeah, go ahead.
This is related to the prior point about assuming liability for data. I know that in a lot of open source software licenses, there's a clause essentially providing no warranty that says like, hey, if there's a bug in here and as a result of that you are harmed, it's not on me. As far as I know, that license is just a text file that accompanies a product. Is there, and I'm unfamiliar with this, when it comes to data, is there legal precedent that applying a similar license doesn't shield the contributor from liability? Okay. Okay. Answer is yes.
Any other questions at this point?
This is probably kind of half-baked and a little odd, but a lot of these kind of assume some knowledge about data and how to make data and how to make data products and that sort of thing. And a lot of that, isn't really something that your general public can do, but only your, academic people can do. But most of them are losing their money, so they won't be doing that much anymore unless they do it for free. And a lot of the products you're talking about end up having flow diagrams that look a lot like this. It's a mess. Where to get to things that the public wants, which are these little purple boxes down here, you end up going through like half a dozen other data products invented by one person at some university somewhere, and who will do it as long as they have a grant. So I guess I'm wondering, how the heck are any of these things going to happen? And when you talk about preservation, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Because if you can't take over like large-scale data, then what are you preserving? Because a lot of these products that I'm talking about, they start off really big and they end up really small 12 steps later. So I'm having issues.
Yeah, these are great points and great questions. I invite anyone who wants to respond in the audience also. I think, so the one question was the taking over the collection and sort of generation of data versus preserving data that's already into distinct data products. I'm talking about preserving those data products. What our initial hypothesis is that we can't take over, generating that, like new data, but data has a shelf life, right? Not, well, certain data. For example, okay. Sorry, okay. certain data has a shelf life. Past data is always helpful, but if you don't have a current census, that has implications that the census from 20 years ago is not going to help with. You know, weather data. You know, weather data from January is not going to help you in June. So I think it really depends on the kind of data, but what the sort of preservation, how useful that is. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, thanks. This is really thought-provoking. I guess a couple thoughts, maybe also half-baked. I think part of the reason why these things are done by the government now is because it's sort of a public good, you know, monetary value sort of situation. If there was monetary value in doing it, then they might already be done, or could be, or would be taken up by other areas of society. So I think a lot of these depend on your sort of view of economics and which direction economics should go. So in a sense, number one, you know, that's something that there are a lot of people who argue that should happen, right? That satellites should be run by private companies and weather data should be captured by private companies and sold to the government. So that's actually one that I would say is probably closer to being a can than many of these others in terms of where things might be going, whether that's what you want or not. So I guess I just want to make that observation that I think monetary value and monetization is critical in the context of non-governmental, whereas it's not part of the business model as much in government stuff. I'm generalizing here, so I'm probably wrong in some cases, but you know, preservation as sort of a public good is generally done by government entities because there's less value in preserving than in providing value-added products that you can sell. Mm-hmm. So yeah, economics is very important in the directionality of a lot of this.
Such a good point.
Jumping off that, that might be another thing that we could do. Like, the companies have been moving much faster than the federal government with a lot of the new satellite programs. We've seen much more agility and creativity, but those of us who are thinking about public good could work with the companies that are doing some of these new, very novel data collections to attempt to make sure that more of their data are made open, you know, rather than all of it being for sale. And I think we're seeing some of that. We're seeing, I don't know, like a Planet Lab, for example, some of what Planet is doing might be an example. Just a quick thought of that. I also wanted to shamelessly, this is all focused on data, which is great. There's also the knowledge layer that we're losing. And so shamelessly, I want to promote a session we're doing tomorrow at 4, aimed at supporting earth scientists and the science. And one part of what we're going to talk about is what might we be able to do to rescue knowledge that we're at risk of losing as people are laid off or otherwise disrupted. So just want to sort of put it in a plug. The knowledge part is another piece, and we actually will have an opportunity to talk about that piece of the puzzle some tomorrow from a standpoint of what can we do about it. So, thanks.
Great. Yeah, there's quite a few sessions, I think, this week that we can that'll help us think about this kind of broader ecosystem of these changes that are happening at the federal level. Just in the interest of time, we've created a kind of poll to help us prioritize these. So we would love, there's a few ways that you can get into this. You can scan this QR code with your phone. If you're in Zoom, one of our facilitators, Dan or Christopher, will send you a link. And also, if you don't have a phone and you just want to get on slido.com, you can enter this tag. So we'll give people a few minutes, and what we're really looking for, the question we pose is which of these do you think are the most likely and the most important for this group to discuss? So in other words, what do you want to talk about today? So we've added a few of the new ones that you brought up today. I'm not sure I got everything, but you should see at least a couple of those. There's also space in there for you to just say something totally different. Is there? There we go, try again. Sorry about that. Yay. Sorry, I needed to click start interaction. Yeah, so take a couple minutes. Basically, we're asking people to choose no more than 6, and we're gonna try to kind of narrow these down to, I don't know, a top 6 or 7 or 8, and then we'll break out and get into a lot more detail about those. So think about what you would like to talk about, where you think we're missing nuance, where you think we might be completely wrong, and we'll give you all a couple minutes. I think people should be able to see the results. And I wonder if I'll be able to actually see that there.
Might be able to share.
Yeah,
From there. Not sure.
let's see. Okay, so it's sharing the screen, right? Not just the Zoom?
Yeah, we can see the slide of.
Okay, I might need to. Sorry, we didn't test this. Give people another minute or so.
You might be looking at it right now as a response.
I know, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to,
I think if you just do anything on
Yeah.
there and then,
there we go, okay. Does anyone need any more time? Just raise a hand if you do. Okay, cool, we'll wait. How about folks in the Zoom room? Need more time? Okay. Okay, cool. You can still respond to this. I'd love for us to try to start moving into groups. It looks like we have a lot of consensus around sharing stories and the value of, things are changing in real time, value of these data sets. Not being able to take over large scale and complex data collection without significant investments. Civil society being able to coordinate efforts to preserve and maintain the discoverability. And then a little bit, some consensus around preserving federal data, monitoring changes, integrating data, generating awareness. So this doesn't necessarily mean people think these other ones aren't true, but maybe they're just not as important to discuss. I'm curious, and we can briefly talk about anything else that we haven't considered. If you added something else that you want to elevate, either from Zoom or in the room, let us know. Okay, cool. Well, if not, it looks like we've got, oh, sorry, the scroll is different from what I usually do. Why don't we take the first 1, 8, 10, 5, up to can generate awareness. So what we are going to try to do, you'll probably have to move around if you're able. So we want to get groups of ideally no more than 7, maybe even smaller, but probably more than 2. So we're going to do this separate from the Zoom room. Dan and Chris are going to open up some rooms for you to talk about these. But for those in this room, we're going to take these first 6, and I'm going to kind of just like assign a space. So whatever you want to talk about, you'll go to that space, and we'll have about half an hour to get kind of into the details of these. So for cannot meaningfully take over large-scale and complex data collection. Why don't we have y'all over here? So this will be 1. Can coordinate efforts to preserve and maintain discoverability. We'll have right behind them. Can share stories behind them. So we'll do 3 on each side, I think. On this side, we'll start with preserve federal data at scale, monitor changes in policy, and then integrate data collected by state and local entities. And we can give y'all a few minutes to figure out where you want to go and move around. And I can repeat those if it'd be helpful. So. Oh, did I miss that one? Oh, yeah, okay. If there's enough people interested, then we can definitely do that one as well. Let's see where there ends up being room. I'm guessing it'll probably be on this side, so. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you recapitulate?
Yes. 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 Okay, so, sorry.
There's some prompts.
1, cannot meaningfully take over, and we'll put prompts up for you as well. So hypothesis 1 over here, hypothesis 8, a couple tables behind, hypothesis 10 in the back, hypothesis 5 up here, 7 in the middle, 3 in the back, and 9, I think we'll probably put you on this side of the room, but we'll just figure out where there's space. Does that make sense to people in the room? Okay. Zoom, I'm gonna let y'all figure out your breakouts.
Yeah, so for those that are virtual, basically what I did is paste it into the chat. I've created 6 virtual rooms or breakout rooms that you can get to in the bottom menu. The first room will be for hypothesis 1, the second room for hypothesis 8, third for hypothesis 10. I guess you can kind of see how this is going. So feel free to pop over to those rooms. I think the system might have tried to assign you. You can leave the room and then rejoin whatever room you want.
All right. Does anyone still need the list up, or can I give you all the prompts? Anyone still need the list? Okay, cool. So, breakout groups. Here are our prompts, and we've got a little bit less than half an hour to do this, and we're going to come back and regroup. So first, we'd love y'all to introduce yourselves to each other. And then you can focus on number 2 and 3. So we'd love for you to talk about and discuss why this hypothesis is likely true, or if you're on this is very untrue and important, then that as well. And then I think you can kind of take these bullet points as suggestions, but we want to hear about the how. So who could do this? What are the possible impacts, positive or negative? If you're talking about a specific data set or type of data, what would you want a steward to know if they're in civil society? And then what next steps might you propose? So it's a lot. Get through as much as you can. If you don't get to everything, that's totally fine. And we will regroup in about... We'll regroup at 3:05.
All right, folks. We're going to do report backs. Everybody ready? So I think what happened was everybody here kind of self-organized into about 4 groups in the in-person room. So good job self-organizing. And then we had 1 group discussing hypotheses online. So we're going to go ahead and report back from each group, and we're going to start with the online group. And so I think what we want to do is start by telling us what hypotheses or hypothesis you discussed in your breakout group, and then take maybe 2 minutes to kind of hit the high points of what you discussed, and try to hit at least one sort of area of positive potential that you see in civil society, addressing whatever hypothesis you were discussing, and then one area or one potential pitfall for that hypothesis that you discussed. So what hypothesis, at least one potential positive, and at least one potential pitfall. So online group, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so real quick, Christopher's going to do the report out, but we basically consolidated all the virtual rooms since there was about one or two people, and we kind of focused in on communicating the value of the data sets. We saw that as one of the most important things. So I'll turn it over to Christopher.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so we focus primarily on the hypothesis that civil society can share stories that communicate the value of data sets. One of the first things that came up that we ended up circling back to was that if people don't know what happens when the data goes missing, then they might not care about it as much. And so that's an important story to communicate. So we talked about stories of environmental hazards, what happens when critical data feeds are no longer available. And there were some data story examples shared. We talked about the Impact Project and EDGI's Environmental Enforcement Watch. And then we posited some questions. So we asked, how can we compile stories when there are so many? An example that was provided was story maps. How can we make stories more discoverable? How can we get them into mainstream media? We talked about generally like making data more accessible to the storytellers and democratizing access. Yeah, opportunities to amplify stories. And then lastly, we did talk a little bit about a couple other hypotheses. So we talked a bit about the hypothesis, civil society can integrate data collected by state and local entities to publish at the national scale. We talked about some challenges there. Silos, it may be hard to integrate across geographies and agencies. And then we talked about that cannot meaningfully take over large-scale data collection hypothesis. And there we talked a bit about telling stories of value and return on investment, and how that might be motivating for some. So I think that kind of summarizes, but if anybody from our group wants to add, please feel free.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go. So this is going to be group 1, 2, 3, 4. So can we start with group 1 and yeah, tell us your hypothesis and what you talked about.
Okay, so our hypothesis was the cannot hypothesis. So let's see if I can find it here. Cannot. Okay, civil society cannot meaningfully take over large-scale and complex data collection without significant investments in funding, infrastructure, and time. Okay, so we kind of focused on the large-scale and complex portion of this hypothesis, and we found that we agreed with this hypothesis as we had conversations. And we kind of looked at it from the perspective of the different entities that could potentially take this on. So, I mean, private companies theoretically could do this, but again, large scale and complex, there would have to be some sort of a business case for doing this, and that's not necessarily going to be true. A lot of the data out there has a good business case is the stuff that's easy to collect and getting easier all the time. But the stuff that will power the innovations that we can't even think about right now is the stuff that is hard to collect. If you just think about all the work done on the internet or going to the moon, those kinds of investments, that kind of risk, that kind of time horizon for a return on your investment, that's not something a private company can really take on. Now, there's nonprofits, of course, and volunteers, and there's lots of projects that do great work with citizen scientists. I'm thinking specifically of all the hundreds of millions of bird observations we have from all over the world. But a lot of times this is organized by a paid executive director. And then there are also issues with citizen science data. And again, that's like one thing, one specific thing. It might be large scale, but it's certainly not complex. Yeah, was there anything else? Did I miss anything? Did I get the example of Google?
The only existing example of large-scale data being collected is Google Maps, basically, that we could come up with, but we don't understand their business model, why they do what they do.
Right, right. Yeah, Google's business model is inscrutable. Okay, group 2.
All right, we were hypothesis 8, can coordinate efforts to preserve and maintain the discoverability of federally supported data sets that are at risk. I don't know if we think this is true at this point from our discussion. We started off by talking about how people are already starting to do this and self-coordinate and using tools that already exist. It didn't take us very long to start thinking about, well, if an academic institution steps up to the plate to say like, acquire this data set, then if their state legislature or the federal government attacks them, then they're also sinking in the ship. We started shifting our conversation to if we're going to coordinate to save the most important things, because changing people's minds of how important data is might take generations. So who carries the most important 5 things in their backpack? Well, we try and convince the world that data is important. Is it more valuable to save 5 books and the ability to read them, or 100 books with no ability to read? And so we thought, if you're going to coordinate something, try and coordinate what are the 5 most important things, but also the knowledge to apply those things with them, rather than just saving all the things with no ability to understand them.
Yeah, nicely said. Okay. Group 3, back in the corner.
Hi, everyone. We had hypothesis 3, which I think our number changed, but we hypothesized that we can share stories that communicate the value of data sets, and we believe that, and we believe that that already happens with science communicators, whether that's with a company specifically talking about what they do, whether it's a social media influencer, whether it is a news article. Science communication happens and is really important, and we are trying to think about how we can ensure that that is communicated correctly. And one of the big things that we've noted is just making sure that it can be connected to people and that they have buy-in. So we have all of this complex information and the importance, but making sure it gets brought to the level where people are coming in at, and I hesitate to say dumbing down, obviously, but just really meeting people where they are to inform them about what is being done and to ensure buy-in from them. So not just like a social media post that's going to be 3 seconds and they scroll on, but really engaging them in what's happening. And so one of the ideas that we had with my company was making sure that if an article is published, how do we communicate that information to the public so that it's not behind a DOI or a journal, but really ensuring that that information is, at least the public is aware of it, so they become, again, more scientifically literate and aware of the issues. And that can get brought down to students, to teachers, just making information more widespread. And again, nonprofits can do that, academic institutions can do that, and just making it a priority And it's not just one organization's priority, but really if you are a science communicator and you see science being communicated correctly, resharing, reposting, re-emphasizing the science, because it's going to make a much bigger impact on the public. And it really does, I believe, start with just, again, making sure that the attention is brought to the issue in the first place so that it doesn't take generations to appreciate something that might be missed. Yeah, also to ensure that the distrust in science, that it's a big issue right now. We don't want to distrust the scientific enterprise as a whole, but by humanizing scientists through stories, it creates connection and builds trust. And so we started our conversation especially with being able to be a storyteller, and it's going to really help connect the information to the public and to who you're trying to reach. If you're just giving information, that's fine, but people don't connect with it. So building that story arc and having the skills to do that are really important, and ensuring that companies, organizations, institutions appreciate that and help the younger generation and the people who are doing the science also understand how to communicate their science to build connection with it.
Okay, so civil society groups can help people tell stories about science and data. Yeah, good. All right, group 4.
Okay. Our hypothesis is that civil society, where'd it go? Civil society can integrate data collected by state and local entities to publish at the national scale. And so we took heart from the example during COVID, where the county public health authorities were reporting up, and Johns Hopkins was able to create a dashboard that managed to integrate all these very disparate data sets. And there's still groups with that expertise. The COVID tracking group still exists that has developed some of that expertise. And so we started by looking at, like, trying to catalog what are the state or local level entities that are already collecting data. So we're not going to try to collect new data. We're assuming that there's a lot of data that's already being collected, and it's a matter of trying to aggregate it. So, public health departments, EPAs, nature conservancies, water boards, there's so many different state and local organizations that are already collecting data. And so then it's a matter of how could we create a model for funding somebody that can create processes for integrating it and sharing it out. And then our biggest concerns are losing control of the narrative. So anytime you start producing data that might imply that there's climate change, you're going to be under attack. Losing control of the data, so we were very suspicious of commercial enterprise being responsible for this aggregation because we might lose this data. And then, of course, this approach really won't help us with anything, what was the terminology, large scale and complex. No, states don't fly satellites, so we'd be left with ground observations or things that the states are already observing. And then, of course, aggregation is hard, and so that's why we usually rely on the federal government to do this. So, but I think I think we accept this hypothesis. I think that was our conclusion.
We also talked a tiny bit about trying to catalog the players, like what are the entities that are already networking across state and local, like in the environmental arena, there's a number of associations of like air people, water people, solid waste people. So trying to make sure that we're aware of the existing kind of network-oriented entities that are players and thinking about how to work with them since they're already talking to states and locals, albeit within silos.
All right. That was all great feedback. So we're coming up to the end of the meeting today. Yeah, and I think, so we want to talk a little bit about next steps. We appreciate all the time and thought you put into meeting with us and discussing the hypotheses and just kind of thinking about the role of civil society in managing federal data, publishing federal data. So I think our next steps are, this group wants to kind of synthesize these conversations. We're going to look over the notes, This is going to, I think, help set some priorities for PEDP. And yeah, if you all are interested, we would really want to share, kind of what we synthesize from this with you all. Yeah, and so PEDP has they're kind of developing an advocacy strategy. They're finding ways to prioritize their activities on archiving data sets. And so this is really going to feed into that. So, and then I think a question has come up for all of us, here at this meeting. There's probably, I think there's some interest at PEDP in kind of participating more with ESIP and maybe kind of, finding a way to participate with ESIP groups like the Data Stewardship Committee. So, yeah, we're kind of interested in continuing to be engaged and hearing feedback on what PEDP does. So, and let's see, any other next steps I'm missing?
I guess also just wanting to continue this conversation, just broadly, not only PDP doing all these things, but kind of coordinating, like sharing out, like this is, these are some ideas about where civil society can be super useful in this really critical time, and kind of sharing that more broadly with, kind of all the groups that we're all networking with, and kind of, yeah, I think having all the expertise that we have in this room right now, it's been really useful to hear this kind of feedback of where priorities should lie. And I think it's really, so we want to share that out also with kind of, partners and we're thinking also the data stewardship or whatever other committee might be a good place to also kind of, share from the knowledge that you all have.
Okay. And then, yeah, last plug is if you want to get involved with PEDP, there's a form here that you can fill out, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.